So we kind of have this complete little project, and we went over the kind of Redux stuff that's kind of underlying this, and how this all works and stuff. But say for instance, now you're at a point where you're like, okay, cool, like I'm done with this project. I want the world to use this project, right? What happens next is the process of deploying your project from production, deploying your project into kind of like, I want to say production, but it might not necessarily be considered production, because you could still have a site deployed for development purposes only. But the idea of deploying a site is the process of saying, okay, now I'm done, and I want it so that other people can access this site and play around with it. And whether it's for testing purposes, or whether it is for actual live production purposes, is up to you, really, and up to like where your code is situated. So I kind of want to just point you out to a resource, though, that kind of comes for free on all of the repos that we've created in our React projects. So if you go to, we've done a couple projects, and each project has its own like README. So remember, whenever you set up Create React App, it creates a little default README for you. But I don't know if any of y'all had taken the time to actually look through the README itself, and kind of see some of the areas that it talks about. So the Create React App README goes through a lot of important kind of things, like the available scripts you have. So we've used npm start all the time to kind of start our projects up. That starts the local development server. Npm Run Tests we haven't talked too much about, but that's how you run tests in your of your Create React App project. Npm Run Build is a very important script. This builds the app for production and creates a folder called a build folder. The build folder basically is a consolidated set of files that take all of your JavaScript files and bundles them all together, so that you can actually host your build folder code on an actual server, which is the process of where deployment comes in. So it takes all of your React code that you wrote and bundles it together for production. And this process of running the build is tied to the process of deployment, which we're going to talk about in a second. Npm Eject is another script. We don't necessarily use it too much, so I'm not going to really touch on it too much. But what I did want to kind of point your attention to here is at the bottom of the README, there's a section called deployment, and it talks about how do you go about deployment of your React project. So if you click this link, actually, it'll take you to a really dope resource and website from Create React App that talks specifically about the process of deployment and how you can essentially use Create React App, or how you can specifically deploy your React projects to different types of servers and different hosted solutions. So it talks about here, Npm Run Build creates a build directory with a production build of your application. So you need that production build once you're ready to actually put your application up for other people to use. The Npm start creates a local server that you can use to test, and that's great for testing in development, but you actually need your code to be a little bit more consolidated when it comes to putting it actually on a server. You need static files. So the Npm Run Build is what creates those static files for you. Inside of our I'm actually gonna go back to this faithful links John as an example. Inside of our project, right, we have this public folder, And the public folder has kind of the important skeleton structure of our site that we need. We have our index.html. That index.html, if you remember from before when we talked about how Create React App works, this is just a template, and that template gets updated, right? That div with the ID of root is where we start inserting, well, where Create React App starts inserting all of the React code that's JavaScript files stored in our source folder, right? So inside of that source folder, we tell that HTML template to get updated with this app component using the React DOM render function, which essentially takes this app component JSX and turns it into HTML that then gets inserted into that HTML document in a very smart and intelligent way. I say all this to say that the source directory has all of the JavaScript-based files that we are working with, right? And in order to actually make the application work, we take all of this JavaScript and combine it into a bundled minified JavaScript file. So it takes all of this JavaScript and turns it into like one giant JavaScript file, basically, that then is ready for us to host on a server. So this is basically what it's talking about. It's like you can choose whatever HTTP server you want. It could be a Python server, it could be a Java server, it could be a hosted server somewhere else. It could be a local server, it could be a cloud-based server, it doesn't matter. So long as it's an HTTP server and people can access your index.html, the run build folder creates a static folder of JavaScript with a main JavaScript file that basically is that bundled JavaScript file that takes all of your components and everything and kind of consolidates it into one giant JavaScript file. So then this resource, the Create React App deployment guide, which again is you can find on any of the READMEs that kind of come in general on your React projects. So in the in these READMEs, right, is at the bottom there, that deployment section. That's where I got to hear from. We'll talk to you about the process of hosting your code on different types of servers. So they show an example of using the serve command from npm to just create a build for yourself and serve your folder, serve your files from that server. But there's all types of other solutions in order to create servers. So you could create a server yourself using Express, which is a node-based package for on the server side. So remember, a lot of everything we've been talking about with React has been client side and talking mostly about how to do your front end and stuff like that. But you also have the ability to do some stuff on the server side. The server side is basically now you creating a server that can host your information for yourself. So here's an example of how you can create an Express server, and Node and Express. Express is a node package that creates lets you create JavaScript-based web servers, HTTP servers. Express is very simple to use, and a lot of people who end up using React will create their servers in Node because it's just JavaScript in the front end, JavaScript on the back end, which makes things a little simple. But you can also use different, like I said, you can make your server in a different programming language if you want. But the idea though is in this server that they created in Node using Express, they also can host that build directory as like a path from the server. So the build folder is now a path, and then they can define different routes that correspond to the actual server that will send back those default index.html file. So the index.html file in React, like any HTML, like any JavaScript project, the index.html file is super important. So they're saying basically you could create your own Express server that's going to host your build folder as asset as a static asset, and then give a reference to that build folder in your server routes, right? And so we haven't really talked about express and routes and server routes like this much, but basically they're just showing you how you could do this within Express. You could literally use this code, use Express, and create a server. This is using a server that would be on port 9000 that would then host that React build and allow for you to have your own server hosting your React code, and then you can just put this node server and the files, corresponding files, up somewhere, like hosting it on your own place. So yeah, like it's saying, you could choose whatever server software you want. This is Express, so they're just showing you how you could do this really easily with Express. Take that build folder that comes back from Npm Run Build. Right, we do that Npm Run. We're gonna have to do that Npm Run Build command. But after you've done that, you can either, use Express, is what they're saying, or you can you can also use other types of server libraries. So just scrolling down here to kind of show you this. So if you keep scrolling down here, it's going to talk to you about different deployment options that you can use, and it kind of just gives you some really good details on how you would use those, how you would get your React app ready to be served up on those different platforms. So Aws Amplify is a cloud-based deployment platform through AWS, so you can host your application on AWS using Aws Amplify. And they give you the steps. So they say, hey, log into Amplify, connect your Create React App repo, pick a branch, and Amplify should detect everything, click save and deploy, and now your app is hosted on Aws Amplify, right? Azure, another is a Microsoft cloud platform. So they're talking about how you can create a new static web app in Azure, add the details, connect your GitHub repo, and then build your app through Azure. Firebase is a Google Cloud offering that allows you to deploy applications as well. So you could use Firebase to host applications as well on Google Cloud. So they just kind of walk you through here how you can use Google Cloud Firebase to host your website and set up a project and host your website, host your app also here. GitHub Pages. So one of the goals for your for this particular project is to deploy. Whether you end up deploying on GitHub Pages or any of these providers is up to you. I don't really care, but I do want y'all to try your hand at it. GitHub Pages is just a free service through GitHub that allows you to host web pages on GitHub for free, and you can basically host your app on GitHub Pages. And it's kind of simple. You make a couple changes to your package.json, and then you install the GitHub Pages module from NPM, and you add a script called deploy in your package.json that will deploy your application into GitHub Pages. And so it kind of walks you through what you have to do in order to get that to be the case. And then you just run the deploy, and then you can specifically host your web app on GitHub Pages. But then GitHub also allows you to change the domain. So if you want to change the domain from whatever it will be for GitHub Pages to a domain that you bought, you can really easily do that as well. With all of these services, AWS, Firebase, Azure, you can really easily change your domain name to be like a domain that you bought, which I would recommend for most sites that you are done with, like especially like a portfolio site. You should have it tied to like, a professional domain to some degree. But your GitHub Pages domain also, I would say, is pretty professional. I wouldn't say that it's not as professional as an actual bought domain. But yeah. So so yeah, so one other really important deployment provider that people like to use is called Heroku. Heroku is a platform as a service offering that allows you to host all types of applications. All of those Jawns that we talked about, like Firebase and all these other things, are tools through cloud providers. All of the cloud providers have some kind of a platform as a service offering that allows you to host applications in general on somewhere. But Heroku is a really kind of like widely known and popular one. So you probably will hear people talking about Heroku at different points in time. But you can host all types of applications on Heroku, including Node, like for all of our JavaScript stuff. You can host some Java applications through Heroku. You can host Python applications, all types of stuff. But like I said, this isn't unique to Heroku. There's offerings through Azure, through AWS, through Google for doing similar stuff. But you can use Heroku if you wanted to host your application, your Create React app on Heroku. They have a unique Heroku build pack that you can use. So if you went there, you could follow the directions there, and it'll kind of tell you like how do you like launch your application in Heroku. It shows it. Where is it? Yeah, here's the steps basically. You create your project, do your thing, and then when you're ready to use Heroku, you have to install the Heroku CLI, and you can basically deploy your React app through Heroku using that that Create React app build pack. And then there's also other options: Netlify, Vercel, all types of different choices for where you can host your application. So I wanted to point this out to you because this resource has just been tremendously helpful, I think, for a lot of folks. And you know, once you make that step of like, I've finished my React project and I want the world to know, this is like where you go next, is right building your source code in your build directory, and then hosting it on some cloud platform or some server of your own that you're using to host your files. And I feel like this resource from the README just does a great job of breaking it down and giving you like the steps for a lot of these different tools. So no matter if you were trying to, like, if you were working at a company that wanted you to use Azure, well, guess what? Now you can just use the Azure section here to kind of get practice hosting your application there. If they were Google based, you know, using Google Cloud, you could use Firebase or AWS if they're using AWS, or if you want practice using any of those cloud providers, you can really easily use these Create React app deployments to get some practice messing around with those cloud platforms as well. Cool. So that was that on the deployment side. I just wanted to kind of throw that into your back pocket, is like all of these resources on how to deploy and making things a little bit more simple for yourself by way of having some great guidelines. So yeah, that's that. And